Up until then, films in Canada were Canadian movies, and these were now movies made for a world market. And David's films were always, to me, the tangent of a tangent. Independent horror films and now specialty horror films. And that's a David Cronenberg film. And we like to say it's a thinking man's horror film. David would say, well, if you're going to watch this, you're going to have to watch it again, or pay real close attention if you're only going to watch it once. Those are words from cinematographer Mark Irwin on David Cronenberg's 1979 film, The Brood. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer. And each week I invite a guest on to discuss the film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia. Today we're talking about The Brood. So, quick synopsis of the film is a man tries to uncover an unconventional psychologist's therapy techniques on his institutionalized wife amidst a series of brutal murders. Tagline for the film is a unique experience in inner terror. The film stars Art Hindle as Frank Carveth, Oliver Reed as Dr. Hal Raglan, Samantha Egger as Nola Carveth, Cindy Hines as Candy Carveth, and Henry Beckman as Barton Kelly. It's written by David Cronenberg, cinematography by Mark Irwin, directed by David Cronenberg, edited by Alan Collins, music by Howard Shore, and costumes by Granada Venet and Devin White. Today, my guest is John Pennington, and I know John from the Royal Film Club. He's been a member for quite some time, definitely one of my favorites, and love your energy when you're talking about films. You have great taste. And I'm just saying that because you're on here. I genuinely love your taste, and I've been wanting to have you on the show for so long, so I'm so glad that not only are you on, but we're talking about Cronenberg. So before we get into that, John, I just want to say thank you for coming
No,
on.
no, no. Thank you. The honor is all mine. You have together and are continuously doing a phenomenal podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, that rivals, I think, Seen and Heard. I'd give you 5 stars, and I don't hand those out like candy.
See, that's
Yeah.
high praise. I'll take it. I love it. Before we get into the film today, we're talking The Brood, but I am interested to hear about, your beginnings in film, how you started watching films on a more serious level, what caused you to seek out films that were outside of, the mainstream.
Well, I don't remember a time in my life where I was not into film. Film was something that my parents actually brought into my life. They took me to see my first film when I was about 4 years old. Just the movie theater experience alone made me just fall in love with movies, and that's all I would do is just want to watch movies, movies, movies. And so my fare through growing through the years was pretty typical of a average boy slash teenager slash person from the Midwest, in
Mhm.
that it was every action movie under the sun. My father always took me to those, with the rare occasion that we went and saw a drama because he was really into those. And then frequenting the blockbusters and the Hollywood videos and everything that nature, because the rental of the place was the only place in the Midwest you could really find movies. And I would spend just hours after making a selection, my one selection for the week, I would just spend an hour just like walking all along the walls, looking at all the box art, which actually eventually led me into Cronenberg. So,
Oh yeah, that's cool.
yeah, I remember very distinctly seeing the box art for The Fly. It shows the telepod that looks like a Ducati motorcycle part with
Mhm.
an arm coming out of one corner and a fly's foot coming out of the other corner, and it said The Fly on top. And I just was like, that is cool. I want to see this.
Yeah.
And my dad told my 6-year old self, no, I think that's a little too much for you. So
He wasn't wrong at that age.
no, he was not
Yeah.
wrong.
No.
He was not wrong, but I eventually did see it. So,
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that might have even been a little better where you're like, okay, I can still remember what the art is, and when you finally get to watch it, it's like obviously a huge
mhm.
deal where you're like, okay, it's time. I feel like a lot of people I know have a similar-ish story with Cronenberg where they're like they heard of something, but they were a little too young, so they waited, and when they finally got around to it, it was like, life-changing. So
Exactly what happened to me.
yeah, part of me feels bad for the younger generation that they don't really have that experience. They still
Yeah.
get to watch, have more access to stuff, but it's not the same. So, yeah.
Yeah. The thing about holding a physical piece of art or a physical medium,
Hmm.
there's just something about that that's very tangible. It makes it seem more real, at least to me. That, yeah, the younger generation, it does not have that.
No, unfortunately. You mentioned The Fly being probably the first Cronenberg film you heard of. Do you remember
Yes.
when you first watched The Brood? What got you to finally watch this one and what your thoughts were on the initial watch?
Yes, I was in high school when I first saw The Brood, and I found it very disturbing, which was interesting because by that point, I had seen The Fly, I had seen Scanners, I had seen Videodrome, so I'd
Mhm.
seen a number of them, but The Brood disturbed me more than any of those. So I just remember being like, oh, wow, this was a very serious movie. There was not any playfulness. A lot of Cronenberg's work is very playful in certain characters, and even some that were dark comedies. This was
Mhm.
like straight serious, and it just made me feel like icky almost, because it deals with a lot of serious subjects. So I didn't watch it again for years, and then I decided to watch it again and liked it more. And as I grew older, I grew more appreciative of it, and now it's probably my second favorite Cronenberg film. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I am glad that you mentioned, I want to hold on to the idea of this being a more serious Cronenberg film because I definitely agree. And we can get into that for sure.
Mhm.
But you would consider yourself, this is probably an obvious question, but you would consider yourself a Cronenberg fan? Have you seen most of his work? Are there certain eras that you prefer, or do you like most of it?
Um, I like pretty much almost everything I've seen from him.
Hmm.
There's not one Cronenberg movie I've seen where I said I will never watch that again. Like them all. I'm more partial to his now that I'm older. When I was younger, I was definitely more into his more kind of playful, kind of punky vibes. Now, as I'm in my 40s, I could say that now, and I have a child of my own, I am very much more into his more serious works. So,
Yeah.
The Brood, Spider, Eastern Promises, Dangerous Method.
Hmm.
So, a lot of his more serious works. Crimes of the Future, is also one that is kind of harking back to his more kind of punky science fiction side. It strikes an interesting tone because it's also feels very serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't feel playful. And I can't wait to see his upcoming film. It's just playing at Cannes, so it's
Yeah.
near completion if it's not completed. So
Yep.
we have some fun things to look forward to.
Exactly that. That's always exciting. I remember when Crimes of the Future got announced, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're getting another Cronenberg, and now we're getting another one.
Yep.
So he seems to be back. But if you're ready to get into the Brood, I definitely am ready.
Let the Brood knock down my door and drag me kicking and screaming. Let's do it.
Well, psychology is a huge part of a lot of Cronenberg films, and it's
Yes.
obviously a huge component in this film. But we see it in a lot of his films, even the more, I would say it's present in almost all of his films in some way or another. And sometimes it's way more obvious than others. Like here, we've got characters who are in that field. And it's essentially a study of the mind and body and the way the mind can transform the body. And that's always been something that he's really interested in.
Hmm.
Here we've got that Oliver Reed character, who's a character, for sure.
Yes, exactly.
And it might seem obvious to have this character. Part of the story could have been told maybe without him, but it adds another layer because of Oliver Reed, sorry, playing him. How do you feel about it being maybe on the nose of having this character kind of explain the way things are going? Because I think he could have told the story of just the husband discovering the wife and all that, but the Oliver Reed character does add something. I'm not sure how you feel about it.
I feel very much for the Oliver Reed character and for having something in there as representative of a someone who's trying to be more of an authoritarian, trying to
Hmm.
really harness something. In this case, he's trying to harness unbridled rage of people that is causing their bodies to, in some cases, turn on them. And it's very representative of where Cronenberg was at the time in his
Hmm.
personal life because you know, there's a lot of backstory that kind of supports the Brood. He started writing the Brood when he was making Shivers, which was 4 years earlier, which was
Hmm.
his first film. So I kind of feel that the Oliver Reed character is a representation of the censorship of the Canadian film critics
Hmm.
he was up against. In the long run, he doesn't believe that they really hurt him, but in the short term, it changed a lot because a number of critics essentially said his films are exploitation, pornographic, and they're being made with Canadian taxpayer dollars.
Hmm.
So, which outraged some people, despite the fact that you talk about those films that were sponsored making millions of dollars, and so all the profits going back to the taxpayers. The articles ignored that, so he couldn't get financing for the Brood. That's why, there's a shift in he did Shivers, he did Rabid, and then there's nothing in he did Fast Company, which is a race car B movie
Yeah.
that very rarely seen. And then he did The Brood because he needed a job. And so, okay, I like cars. I'm going to make this car movie that somebody wants to pay me for.
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of people have done it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
hey, like if that leads us into the Brood, then you can make another Fast Company. Like,
Yeah.
I don't mind. But we also had the story for any audience members who are unaware. He also went through a really bad divorce with his wife
A
and is
horrible
going
divorce.
through, yeah, a pretty nasty child custody battle. So this is also a reaction to that. And it's interesting to write a character like the wife in this and the father character, which I definitely want to talk about because it's not often we get this dynamic. Usually it's switched. And
Yeah.
we get this in this where the woman is, for most of the part, she's just pretty docile, and we don't get too much of her until the end, where we're understanding that she has all this rage and she's now created, this entity essentially. But before that, hearing all the stuff about it, I know that if you read some criticism around the time, people thought it was sexist. I think
Hmm.
if you take it into context with his battles with his wife and just allowing him to have anger and rage because he's allowed to, just, I don't think it's sexist. At least I don't read it that way. I think a lot of things need to be taken into context, but also even if you just watch it on surface level, it's like he's not saying anything bad about her. I think it's just that he created a woman who has rage, and that's realistic. The way it's portrayed might not be, but that's fine. It works within the world of this film. How do you feel about way that that people would probably view it as being misogynist, but knowing that it's not really? At least I don't feel. I'm not sure how you feel about it.
I don't feel it's misogynistic. At the same time, I want to note that sexism and misogyny is a very strong subject, and it's a difficult subject to talk about.
Hmm.
And what we are discussing is supposed to be a piece of art. So, whatever we say about it, we should just precursor that, this should be taken with a grains of salt.
Yep.
Um, I don't necessarily feel that this is misogynistic. Her character in this film, in this role, is a victim. Yes, her rage is causing her body to produce these offspring that we call the brood that go out and do her rage induced killing. But she herself is an abuse victim. And there's a very key scene with and Dr. Hal Raglan, Oliver Reed, where he's finally able to get her to open up that she has been abused by her mother and her father was not there to protect her.
Yeah.
So this is a woman who has been through the ringer more times than once. She wants what's best for her daughter, not always able to provide that because of, the lot she was dealt with in life
Hmm.
and her how she's allowed to process it. So I don't find it misogynistic, and in some cases I do find it as he's easing the pain,
Yeah.
especially when our lead character ends her life.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect way of putting it, especially knowing that it's based on his portrayal of his wife at the time. And,
Yeah.
there's a lot of emotion when you're writing about a personal experience, people that you didn't have the best situation with. But I think giving her character that backstory humanizes her instead of making
Hmm.
her a full monster. Because if we didn't have that, we would just be like, she obviously has mental health issues, but she's going to be portrayed as a monster without any sort of layers. And she's definitely one of the probably only female character in this with layers, because the only other two women in this are not so much. And you get those kind of stereotypes because the woman who's the young daughter's teacher is kind of just seen as this angelic, woman who can do no wrong. But then,
Other figure.
yeah, exactly. And it's interesting having that character. And then the only other woman you get really is the mother-in-law who's just
Drunk.
drunk. There's a scene, and I shouldn't laugh, but I laugh every time I watch it, where she's watching her granddaughter and she just starts making a huge drink. And it's like, ma'am, it's 10:30 in the morning.
It's 10:30 in the morning, and then she has the little girl, her name's Candy in the movie. Candy
Hmm.
has her drink, which is like, I think some milk or some juice, and grandma's like, I'll go refreshen our drinks. And she's still
Yeah,
got half of hers left.
I
And
know.
she fills it up and she fills hers back up too. I'm just like, yikes.
Yeah. Yikes. Yikes is the word. It is a funny scene. Very dark.
One moment of levity in the brood.
It really is the one moment of levity in the entire movie, and you need a little bit of levity. But that actually brings me to the point that you were making before of how this is a more serious one, because you mentioned the films leading up to this. If we even omit Fast Company, we'll talk about Shivers and Rabid. Those are more straightforward, kind of way. A lot of things he's known for, the psychosexual body horror style,
Mhm.
and those are campy in a way. And then we get something like The Brood. And I remember watching those two back to back and being like, okay, I'm making my way through. At the time, I couldn't find Fast Company. So I went to The Brood after, making
Yeah.
my way and just being like, oh, there's not really any sort of violence for a while in this film. But there's such an air running through this, like an energy where you're like, something is about to happen just from
Yeah.
the opening and how long the opening is and kind of how still the air is. And there's not too much score going through where you're like anticipating. How do you feel about that tonal shift in filmmaking for him and how it leads to more serious stuff? And he obviously didn't just only continue making serious stuff, but how he was able to show that he is capable of it and why it works for this story in particular.
It works for this story in particular in that this is just a entirely creative outlet based off of where he was in his life, and he was not in a good place. Yeah, nothing, no like brutality or murder happens on screen until like about 9 scenes into the movie. Yeah, but you still have the opening sequence with Hal Raglan and Mike, the character Mike, engaged in psychodrama, uh,
Hmm.
where you first see the psychoplasmids that come from, and that's just startling. But then the very next scene, Frank takes his daughter Candy home and finds all these bruises on her back.
Yeah.
So, and just, that in itself makes it serious. So the fact that he's willing to show that harm really what sets the tone. I think it works great. It works great because at least for me, I was uneasy. I was like, what is this I'm about to see? And that just made the dread of something else is going to happen even
Hmm.
more. And I mean, you get towards the last third of the movie, and it is one of the most horrific murders I've ever seen in cinema on display.
Yeah.
The earlier murders are stepping stones and very small stepping stones in comparison to that one.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. And well, obviously get into that for sure. I do want to go back to something you mentioned of, the first few scenes and how unsettling they are. And you and I would have both watched the Brood quite a few times before we had our own children.
Yeah.
And I remember every time seeing that scene with the bruises and it being so early on and feeling like, oh gosh, like a sense of dread. And now even more watching it a few times since I've had my daughter and just being like, it's just like another level of it. It's one where you don't need to have kids to be like horrified by seeing that image, but
Yeah.
when you have your own children, and he had his own too, so he knew what he was doing, where he's like, he's gonna put you in a place so early on where you're like, I'm setting the tone right away, so you're not mistaken as to what you're getting into. Still doesn't lead you up to what we're getting through because there's no way you could be mentally prepared for that, even if you've
Yeah.
seen other Cronenberg stuff. But it does a pretty good job at getting you there a little bit, for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, you're definitely interested at the very least. If you're not like dreading something happening, you are interested in what you're seeing.
Yeah, I find, when it comes to horror films, and this is a horror film, because horror is such a broad genre. This is a type of horror, psychological horror. There's a bit of body horror, obviously. But when it comes to children being in horror, there's always like you can go either something like The Omen, you can go, Village of the Damned, you can go The Bad Seed, and you can go The Brood. There's always going to be a level of unease with this. He really, it's weird because when you see the broodlings running around, you're like, I'm so confused as to what I'm watching. Like, are these children?
Yeah.
What are these things? Because they look like children. How do you feel even outside of like this film first? Like, how do you feel about children in horror?
How I feel about children in horror? Well, I'll say this. The three examples you gave with The Omen, The Bad Seed, Village of the Damned, the children are the villains.
Hmm.
And in this one, the children is the villain, or the quote unquote children are the villains, but then there's also a child who is a victim. When a child is a victim in horror movies, I mean, it is not no longer a fun horror movie for me.
No.
No. It is no longer a fun horror movie for me, with the exception of The Exorcist,
Yeah. Yeah.
which even the first time I saw it, I was this is serious, but then after repeat viewings, it changed. But no,
Yeah.
it is not, at least for the first viewing, it is not a fun horror movie experience. When they're the villains and they're the only, and they are villains straight up and there's no children victims, I'm like, let's go. Let's do it.
Right.
I'm all for it. So,
Exactly. Because there's no threat. Well, like at that point, you're like, they're kind of like they're kind of inhuman at that point. So you lose a bit of empathy for them. But in this case, like you're just terrified for Candy the whole time.
mhm.
Let alone the dad. Like, I'm also scared for him, but like I'm more concerned about Candy the
Yeah.
entire time because I'm like, what's happening to her? What is her mom doing to her at that point? Because at that point you assume the mom's doing stuff and to her. And when the broodlings come along, you're like, this girl's in danger the whole time.
Mhm.
So there's that threat running through it because it's really about saving her as opposed
Yeah.
to, the dad in this. I know he's essentially kind of the lead in this film. And actually, I do want to talk about him because a lot of people, almost everyone I talk to about this film, absolutely hates his performance because they find him so boring.
Everyone talked to some people say, you know what, that could have been a cool movie, except the lead guy. I mean, I hated him.
Well, let's talk about that because it's a choice. You know,
Hmm.
Cronenberg obviously had a part in casting or choosing him and his direction. And the first few times I don't think I ever hated him, but I just was like, he's my least favorite, like the least memorable. As I've watched it over the years, I think it's important that he's boring because there's so much going on. We're kind of just he's a
Yeah,
vessel
it
for us
is.
to be going through the story.
You know, I kind of felt like he was a wet noodle when I first
Mhm.
watched the movie. I felt like the only time he actually took action was at the end. But
Mhm.
now that I've seen repeated viewings and now that I have a child of my own, I understand every move that guy makes.
Yeah.
I really understand. This is a guy who is just running into opposition at enclosed doors at every single point, and he's just been told time and time again, you got to stick this out. You have got
Yeah.
to stick this out. And so you just get this unaffected face of, okay, this might as well have happened. I mean, because when we say that, this was inspired by Cronenberg's divorce, Cronenberg was that person who was just in it until it was over.
Mhm.
Because this is how bad it got with him and the custody battle. There were times where he would get on a plane in Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Mhm.
I have that correct.
Yeah, you do.
Fly to LAX, drive through several hours to some remote commune where his wife had taken their daughter, go pick up his daughter, drive back, book a flight from LAX back to Toronto, take it home, and put her to bed. And he
Yeah.
did that multiple times because she could take her anywhere because she was her mom, and he could
Yeah.
take her because he was her dad. He was her dad. So it was just a time where and so in the Brood, it's this that conversation with his lawyer. He says, you can photograph this, but if you don't have any proof, we can't prove that the wife abused. And
Hmm.
quite frankly, I mean, we ultimately find out she never touched her.
Yeah.
He didn't abuse. It was the Brood based
Hmm.
off her emotions. So Candy is kind of, scared from the Brood, even though she knows they're around her mom, but she also has never been hit by her mom, so she still loves her mom.
Yeah.
It's a complex scenario there.
Which I think is just like a great writing on his part because as angry as he obviously was, he really could have painted this character in the worst light possible. But you understand that they're obviously with his own wife, she had some issues she needed to deal with, where she
Hmm.
was unable to understand that the situation she's putting her children in are not safe or
Yeah.
not great. So for him to restrain himself in a way where he was like, I still, this is still a human being I'm speaking about is, I think, very mature.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
I think that's the beginning of a lot of mature stuff that he starts to create within the rest of his career. But in terms of like parenthood, and it's odd because we don't really get that many more films of his where characters are parents. This is definitely the more prominent one. And I think it's also a commentary on his own self as a parent. And maybe who knows how much he would have stepped up had the wife not been that way, right? He's an artist doing his own thing, filming and creating art just is just like a time consuming thing that he probably wasn't home a lot of the time, but had to step up. So I think he's recognizing that in this character too, where this character is now having to be a full-time dad. It's also just a comment on looking at a little person that you've created and realizing that they are a separate entity, but that they are also can be extensions of yourself and
Yeah.
very much an extension of oneself in this film. Uh, how do you feel about like, just the concept of the parenthood in this film as it relates to both of these parents?
It's difficult because you never see Candy and Nola together.
Yeah.
So all you have is Nola's expressions and verbal expressions of love towards Candy. And it was always interesting to me, especially in later viewings of The Brood, that when she's enraged, the Brood go out and kill.
Hmm.
When she's in love, the Brood don't do anything. They don't go out and like give gifts or something like that or show an expression of love. It's only through rage. I identify with Frank more as the parent because he's obviously trying to keep his daughter out of harm's way, trying to figure out what's going on, going to work, having to deal with the drunk grandmother and the drunk grandfather. So the expression of parentism is, to me, at least on the Frank side, is that he's in it for the long haul and he's sticking it out because you never see that guy take a rest.
No.
You never see that guy take a rest. The only time he's really like relaxing is when he's first talking to Ruth and he gets
Hmm.
interrupted at the dinner, or when he's in the police station being explained that your mother-in-law is dead and your daughter is essentially the prime suspect.
Yeah.
And that's when couch going, I don't know. What do you want me to say?
Yeah, and I think then also, I mean, it takes a couple of viewings, as we've both said, to appreciate what the actor who plays the father is doing. But I
Mhm.
think that if he was overreacting or just like reacting in a way that was like he's frazzled and he's shaken up, it just would take away from it and would be a little less realistic. And I'm sure some people would be like, full on freaking out. But when it comes to something so serious as your own child, you have to be level-headed and clear. And I think
Mhm.
he's trying to do that in the best way he can, because he's like, I need to get this done as quickly as possible because I cannot allow this to go on any longer than it does. So for
Yeah.
him to be just having a meltdown about things takes away from the fact that this is not about him. It's about his child.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I think that's also in the direction from Cronenberg.
Absolutely. And when you have Samantha Eggar and Oliver Reed, and I don't remember the actor's name, but you have Mike, and then you
Hmm.
have Jan with the mouth with
Yeah. Yeah.
everything. You need somebody to be kind of like the calmness in the movie because
Yeah.
these are Oliver Reed sounds so quiet and understated, but he's really overplays everything in a
Yep.
very quiet way. So the balance is there. And Cronenberg also has a tendency to like ineffective protagonists.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he will follow suit again in Scanners.
Hmm. I think there's just so much happening to a lot of these characters in his films that if they were also matching the energy, it would be way too overwhelming for the audience because a lot of the other characters are matching the energy. And like you said, with Oliver Reed, he sounds like he's, relaxed and level-headed, but he's obviously not. And I think it's also a choice to have Oliver Reed, who I want to talk about for sure, because
Oh yeah,
I
it's a lot
know
to talk about.
the first couple times I watched this for sure, I didn't know who Oliver Reed was at the time. I
Mhm.
later saw a bunch of his stuff and I remember being like, oh my God, is that the guy from The Brood? And then when you watch his other stuff and go back, you're like, oh, this is peak Oliver Reed
Mhm.
performance. This is
Yeah.
peak Oliver Reed. And I know there's a great story of him, also peak when he was filming this in Canada and he just went off and got extremely drunk one night after filming and was like found basically disrobed in the middle of the road and was arrested. And he just like talked his way out of it, essentially,
Yep.
which he's obviously known for. But his performance, and it's a choice also to have him as the opening person of this film
Mhm.
because, like we've been saying, it really sets the tone.
I think his performance is pitch perfect for this type of movie.
Hmm.
I think that the opening scene with him and Mike, and when you first see then psychodrama, and as Mike gets more rage induced, these sores just start appearing all over his chest and then get bigger and bigger.
Mm,
It really makes you go, okay, this is crazy. What is this guy capable of? What does he have in his pocket? I mean, he's definitely the puppet master.
yeah.
He runs Soma Free, the his place, basically like a circus. These are my puppets. I'm going to engage in psychodrama with them. I'm going to
Hmm.
pretend to be their family members that they have issues with. I'm going to pretend to be their best friends or their children. They're going to expunge their rage, and I'm going to watch what happens and then write about it. I described this to a psychologist, a friend of mine, and he said, "Wow, that sounds like a horrible movie for a psychologist to watch." But it kind of all does make sense, and in the ways that he does it does appear to make sense because, when the human body is stressed, overworked, under periods of stress. I mean, we're all living post-COVID
Hmm.
or still in COVID in many cases.
Yeah.
We know what stress does to our bodies. Our heart rates go up. We break out in hives or acne. We gain
Hmm.
weight. These are stress responses. So if your body is already attuned to react to stress and anger and these high pitched emotions, the only leap that you need to take is, what if these stress responses create something like a cancerous growth or a massive mole or a little broodling person?
Yeah.
So the fact that he is able to quietly enter into these people's lives, engaging in psychodrama, and it not only sets the tone for the entire movie, it is how the whole movie works. And he's doing it up until the very end. Even when he's talking to Frank outside of the barn, saying, "You go confront Nola, I'm going to get candy. As long as you keep her happy, they won't kill me." And he says it in ways that he knows he's not coming back out, but at
Yeah.
the point he feels he needs to do this. So there is a change
Yeah.
in his character.
Exactly. And that's interesting to me too, because the whole time you're kind of playing detective with him where you're like, what's this guy's deal? Like, is he, some sort of evil mastermind, if you want to be dramatic about it? Or is he actually trying to help these people, but he's gone too far and he's too, his ego has grown larger than anticipated. I think it's more along that. I don't think he intentionally trying to, ruin these people's lives. I think that he just thinks he's smarter than he actually is. Bit him in the ass in the end,
Yeah, yeah.
to say the very least. But I think he is his deep down intention is to try and help these people, realizing that he's not skilled enough, not realizing, I should say, that he's not skilled enough to actually help them beat their rage.
Yeah.
Because that's a really difficult thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I have no word. That, I mean, you said is absolutely true. At some point, he definitely had self-serving focus because he
Hmm.
it's the whole book about it.
You got to make some money off it, obviously. Other
Yep.
people's trauma.
You can't buy that mid-calf robe for nothing.
No. Well, we've kind of danced around some of the more violent parts of this film. We're kind of leading up to that portion of the film. We'll get into the details of it, but just before that, you know, Cronenberg, I think when you talk to the average person, I say that in quotes because I'm not saying it to be demeaning, but I'm talking about the average person who's probably heard of the name Cronenberg, associates him to something like The Fly, Videodrome, Naked Lunch. Anytime I talk about Cronenberg, the people who are not super, super into film, they're like, oh, it's super gory. And some of his stuff can be a bit gory. I would say most of it isn't. It's more about the psychological effects on
Mhm.
people and their bodies that
Yeah.
leads to a bit of body horror. How do you feel that this film fits within the films that he's created within the body horror genre? Because there is violence in this, but it's sporadic enough until we get to our ending.
Um, this film, oddly enough, doesn't really let the blood fly that much. You have essentially, except for the broodlings that die, you have basically five murders in the movie or five deaths. And the first two, they're beaten. And then you have the third murder, which is one of the most horrific murders I think has ever been committed to celluloid.
Mm,
And should we just dive in?
yeah, please. You can go
Okay.
ahead.
So in this moment, and I'm talking about in broad daylight, two broodlings enter Candy's school and
Yeah.
brutally beat her teacher to a pulp, to a bloody pulp, in front of all these young 4, 5, 6 year old children. And the children are getting splattered with blood. The children are screaming. The children are running out of the room, and they are like all traumatized when the first adult reaches them. It is by far, I think, the most horrific thing that Cronenberg's ever put on celluloid.
Oh, I would 100% agree. I think it's
Yeah.
more terrifying than our ending scene, even though everyone talks about the ending with Nola, but it's really that scene where every time I watch it, I'm like, well, the lives of those children are ruined. You
Yes,
know,
exactly. And there's like 20 kids in that room.
yeah. Therapy for life, essentially.
Yep. Psychoplasmids, here we come. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's just the concept just the whole concept. A teacher is murdered in front of her 5-year-old students. I mean, some
Yeah.
they look up to for protection, and the teacher is brutally murdered. And this is in 1979. This is before Columbine, before any of that. I mean, how this is not talked about, I don't really know. And it is graphic. It is one of the bloodier moments. It's not the bloodiest, but it is one of the blood
Hmm.
moments. And it is the one that is given the most remorse because
Yeah.
not only do we witness this murder, but when the first adult who runs in, who happens to be Frank,
Hmm.
first thing he does is take something that a kid has drawn, which is a picture on a large piece of construction paper, and he covers her face with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrific, but by far not nearly as bloody as anything in The Fly. Not nearly as bloody as the exploding head and Scanners. There's definitely many more grotesque moments in Cronenberg. And then to continue on with the film, you have the death of Hal Raglan when the Broods beat him to death, which is probably the least bloody
Yeah.
of the killings. And then you have the moment. Would you care to reveal the final one?
Yeah. At this point, you know the broodlings are coming from her, but you don't know what's going on, how they're being
Yeah.
formed. She's sitting there with a nice flowing white dress on. The lighting on her is gorgeous. And when we get the reveal, she lifts up her dress. The reason why this scene is probably talked about more than the teacher scene is because it's so shocking. But the other one is more effective in my mind than this one. But this one's one where you're like, don't know what to say right now.
Yeah.
And it takes a few times for you to be like, because I remember the first couple times watching it and just being like, oh God, I'm not ready for this scene to come up because it's really gross to see it. It's really gross. And not only that, she pulls out one of the broodlings and then she's licking the blood off the broodling. And you're like, all right, so we're just going all the way there. We've dialed it up. And it's really within the last few moments of the film.
Last 10 minutes. Yeah.
It's just, I've seen it in the theater before once, and it's just dead silent during that scene because everyone, it doesn't matter how many times you've watched it, the air just gets sucked out of the room because you're like,
Yeah.
I cannot believe what I'm watching. And I think it's just so great that the whole film wasn't like that because
Hmm.
it would not have been as effective to have that final scene if we'd gotten so much of that throughout. How do you feel about reserving it for that and it not just being kind of for a shock value ending? Because there's a lot of shocking moments in this, but I think it's just so perfectly done.
I like it at the end because it answers all the missing questions in an image.
Yeah.
And that's storytelling at its finest, is when you can answer questions with images. Nola is sitting there with her dress lifted up, and she has all these external wounds that she then bites open one, peels it back, and
Mhm.
then, like a mother cat or a mother dog licks the fluid off of her new broodling. It's something unfathomable to think of because the human race thinks itself more sophisticated than it really is. I mean, if we were still in caves and doing that, we would be giving birth to children and then licking them clean too.
Yeah.
So I was surprised that it was there when I first saw it, but I was not repulsed by it.
And because he's such a smart writer, it never comes across as like it's a commentary on childbirth. I think that would be like a juvenile way of thinking
Mm.
about it because it's not about that. He's not trying to say that that's childbirth or taking care of a newborn child in that sort of way. Even just like the concept of cutting off an umbilical cord and
Mhm.
chopping it off with your own teeth. He's not making it seem like that's repulsive to him. I don't think he thinks any of that is repulsive. I think he's
Yeah,
saying this is natural and it's natural to this character. That's not what the horrific part of this is. It's what they're capable of doing afterwards. But that portion of it is he kind of shoots it as though it's something of beauty to marvel at.
yeah, he does, and it's taking his psychoplasmic concept and taking it to the absolute extreme, and then he shoots it like a beautiful documentary.
Yeah.
We're privileged to be part of something. I watch it today and I see her licking the fluids and the blood off, and I'm just like, well, some people eat their placenta.
No.
I mean, how is that different? I mean, maybe that's a need for her to do that to provide more nutrients for their, back sack and things like that.
Yeah.
So, but no, I love it. It's definitely an image that I don't forget,
No.
but I don't cringe at it. It says more about Frank when he is repelled by it, though,
Hmm.
in my opinion. It's more, I think he's repelled by it because he knew once what was and what is now, and there's no going back.
Yeah. The image is shattered for him, like
Yeah,
completely. He
absolutely.
just, at that point, I think just the look on his face too was like, he no longer views her as the same woman he was once with, or as even Candy's mother. She's now
Yeah.
this whole other entity that he cannot recognize. Instead of recognizing this is the same woman who also gave birth to your daughter. And she's continuing to do that just in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, and he starts the scene off right. He says, "Let me be part of your new life." And she's like, "You think you're ready for my new life? Check it out." And
Yep.
she was right. He's not.
No. Although it would have been funny if he was. He's like, yeah, all right, let's bring it on. But would have been out of character for this
Yeah.
character.
Every single moment, every single scene leads up to something in this movie. There is not a plot hole to be found.
No, which is wild in a movie like this, where you expect to be like, well, that doesn't seem plausible. Like everything's plausible within the
Yeah.
universe he's created.
Just that one little leap of faith that they could make another creature.
Hmm. Yeah.
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 And the fifth murder is that Frank then kills her. So
That one's a quicker one. Yeah, what I've been saying and what I've always said about Cronenberg is that he's always just so efficient with his time, and he's able to create such insane worlds within like, often 80 to 90 minutes screen time, which is insane to be able to do that. I wish most people were as efficient with their writing and filmmaking as he is.
yeah, you can definitely tell the scripts he's written that he's filmed because
Hmm.
no fat,
No.
no extra bits. What is needed, and let's go. Anything else that is kind of added is added by the actors with his encouragement.
Are there parts of the story, the filmmaking that we haven't chatted about that you want to bring up?
Cinematography.
Yeah.
Yeah, cinematography, the lighting and the filming by Mark Irwin.
Hmm.
I like Mark Irwin. He's worked on several Cronenberg films up until I believe his last one was Videodrome before they went on working on separate projects. I've always liked his lighting style because it's especially in this movie where it's a horror movie, it's now it's he kind of has the opposite concept of let's start with darkness. Now what do we absolutely have to show? No, he's like, let's light the scene. And now
Hmm.
where can we take away the light?
Yep.
Because with both the scenes where grandma and grandpa, the drinkers,
Hmm.
are setting the stage for their ultimate demises. The scenes are pretty well lit. There's only a
Yeah.
handful of shadows, and it would be just like the normal shadows you would see in your house. But where they're at and when they apply, I mean, it does add a serious sense of moodiness. It's not like what did I watch the other week? I watched Sinister, and that movie was like, okay, I'm going to open this door, and now I'm in a really black hallway, and I can't see anything. I mean, that's not scary.
No, right?
That makes me go, okay, anything can happen, so I'm just going to be prepared for whatever happens. I've always enjoyed his cinematography. And with the exception of the ending scene, The Brood is a daylight horror movie.
Yes. I meant to bring that up also. So I'm glad that you said that because a lot of the films, like you said, apart from the ending and the scene that we were talking about with Candy's teacher, that's in like there's so much lighting in that to the point where you're like, you're not that's why you're not expecting it to be so gruesome because you're like, in most other films, the lighting would be a lot dimmer. They'd find a way to dim the lights to set the mood. This is just like, no, it's happening,
In bright, bright lights, no shadow.
which makes it more terrifying because you're like, oh, this is real,
Yeah,
you know? And it would just make no sense for it to be dark. They're
yeah.
literally at school. It's school, you know, it's daytime. They're in grade one or something, grade two. The room should be bright with all of their, kids' drawings all around. So yeah, the cinematography in this is great. And then the darker scenes like, that we do get later on in the film in the last really 20 minutes are also just so beautifully shot and lit.
You can have a dark scene and still have light. And I think Irwin did a great job with that.
Yeah.
And there's also a point in the movie where the cinematography for The Brood changes because up until we find out in the autopsy room, which is I don't know what kind of autopsy room is in all bathed in purple, but it works.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, did Rodney Miller walk in the door? We now are tracking the brood with the camera versus in the beginning we were tracking the victim with the camera.
hmm
And now we're tracking the brood as they go to Candy, lock her in a room, and then go to the teacher. Very different, very different. Makes it even more unsettling.
It's wild to see a film with, like we said, not as much violence as you would expect. And but although the scenes that do have violence are effective, but some of the scenes that don't have violence are the most eerie. Like I always think of the scene where you see Candy in between the two broodlings and they're in their snowsuits and they're walking along the stretch of road and you're like, I don't know where they're bringing this girl.
Yeah.
And how long they've been walking. They seem to be alone. And what happens if someone stops and is like, why are these children walking on their own? Thankfully, they would take care of her in that situation,
Yeah.
just in case it was a creep. But it's terrifying. That scene always creeps me out a lot. It's one of the creepiest scenes for me because I'm like, oh my God, they just look like you would just, if you saw them from behind, you're just assuming this is three children. And they are three children, just only
But
one of them is fully human.
that shot you're talking about I mean, that should have been the movie poster.
Yeah, I love that movie poster that they made
Yeah,
up.
I would love that as the movie poster. The movie poster for this movie is actually kind of weird.
I
So
know.
I don't think that helped it when it was released. No. And this is the first film that Cronenberg collaborated with Howard Shore.
hmm
Wow, that was I can't think of a better pair of composer and director matched except for maybe Nino Rota and Fellini or John
hmm
Williams and Spielberg.
hmm
Yeah, I mean, because the scores to come are just brilliant, and this is the
Yeah.
start.
This one's great. And I think the music in his films, it just is never off. Like it's always on.
Hmm.
And another film covering for this series is Naked Lunch, and that's another Howard Shore score and just perfect.
Yeah,
It's to be able to match the energy of Naked Lunch and not overwhelm it is a skill in its own. So,
very much so, very much so.
yeah.
You know you're onto something good when you are Howard Shore and you're working on another movie altogether, and the only direction you get from a director is write one of those Cronenbergian things for me. That was one of the pieces of direction Peter Jackson gave him when we're collaborating on Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for the spider sequence where Frodo was
Mm-hmm.
like caught in the web and the spider sequence.
I didn't know that. That's a good piece of
Yeah,
trivia. But now, like thinking about it, I was like, yeah, that totally makes sense. That's
yeah,
so funny.
and that's from a DVD extra.
Well, there you go. That was The Brood. I mean, I still want to talk about Cronenberg and The Brood a bit more, so will move
Let's
to the
do it.
last segment of the show. Got two questions for you. And first one is yourself being a Cronenberg fan and having seen quite a few of his films, if someone were to come up to you and say, "Hey, I heard about this Cronenberg guy. Where should I start? What film are you recommending to them and why?"
I would probably recommend right off the bat Existence,
Okay, nice.
um, because that one is definitely a Cronenberg movie. It's
Yeah.
kind of harken back to his a little bit more punk vibe. It's very playful. It's very brain heavy. It does not have a lot of shock value, So I'm kind of thinking that a lot of people would be turned off by some of the grotesque materials that you could find in Cronenberg, but it still has some images that you'll never forget. So I'm going to go with Existenz.
That's an interesting choice. I was not expecting that. And I love Existenz. It's one of my favorite. It's definitely in my
Mhm.
top five. But with Existenz, you get, I think, polar opposite views or thoughts about it. I think from people, the people who love it. And the other ones who are not a fan of it at all, which is weird. I think it's some people find it a little sillier than they were expecting.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I love it. I think you need some sort, like in terms of if you're looking at his body of work as a whole, you need something that's a little lighter, but still
Mhm.
is very much, like you said, his more punk vibe and perfectly shows everything he's capable of doing. And it's because there are serious moments. There are those moments of like psychology and body transformations, essentially. So that's a good one. I kind of went with either depending on the person. So I think right off the bat, I'm always just like, oh, you got to watch Videodrome.
Yeah,
But like you said,
that's a good one.
it might throw off people. I'd say half the people you recommended to might be like, please don't ever recommend me something like this again. And other people would be like, this movie changed my life. But if I think that someone's going to resonate maybe something with more psychological, but might not be ready for something like The Brood just yet, I might recommend Dead Ringers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for something more psychological that can ease them into the weirdness and the psychosexual stuff that he likes to explore,
Hmm.
that's present in a lot of films, but is
Oh,
obviously more present here without going into Crash right away, because that's also something that might scare people.
Crash is something you got to watch like five Cronenbergs in.
Yeah, you really need to put in some work before you can get to Crash. Anyone who's watched Crash, yeah, first and still made it through.
Crash is my favorite Cronenberg.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, it's my favorite Cronenberg one. Well, that's one you have to search for.
Hmm.
The
Even now.
yeah, the only easy way to get it is to buy the Criterion version off the website
Yeah.
because they don't stream it.
Which is wild because they've streamed wilder stuff than that.
Yeah,
So I
that's
don't know
true.
why they haven't put it up.
The censors in the world really, I mean, I mentioned how much a couple people jumped on him for Shivers and Rabid. I mean, the entire world came down on him like a freaking anvil when Crash was released.
I can imagine. My God. But releasing that today, no, I don't. No one would have. A lot of people wouldn't have the audacity, the the guts to do that.
Yeah, I think, well, it would be released today because if they really, I mean, they released Gasper Noé,
That's true. The
which he
French,
did.
though, the French do their own thing. They're on their own wavelength of stuff. They can release whatever, and everyone's like, oh, the French, myself included. Yeah. Oh, I love them.
We all love the French.
Yeah.
So,
Second question, the last question of the evening is the double bill. So we've got The Brood, and you want to throw on another film or films if you have more than one option with this to create a double bill. What film are you picking, and what's the reason for that double bill?
well, I decided to go with a film by another fellow Canadian friend.
Okay.
I decided to go with the 1986 picture known as James Cameron picture Aliens.
Okay, nice.
For several reasons, the this film and the Cronenberg and not the Cronenberg, but and
Yeah.
the Brood share very much a lot of similar elements and similar themes,
Hmm.
despite them both being incredibly dynamically opposite films. In both cases, we have a strong female character who is having to deal with the effects of traumatic stress. We
Hmm.
have a parental figure trying to save their little girl.
Yep.
We have a a creature that we don't understand who is main goal is to kill and sometimes bring back, all being ruled by a queen mother. We have we have a male individual who wants to explore and these creatures for self-serving needs, and we have just a lot of daddy issues
Yeah.
in both films. A horror film set in some place in the world where there's a lot of winter, and the
Hmm.
is a futuristic combat film that echoes Vietnam. So,
Yeah. That's when it's broken down. I don't know that I realized these similarities. That would make for a great night. I feel like
yeah.
that's would be like that would sell so many tickets at a theater showing those two. People would like flock to watch both of those movies back to back.
And I have a feeling that some people are going to go there for The Brood, and then some people are going to go there for Aliens.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
So,
it would be interesting. Do you know what order you would put them in?
oh, I'd probably show The Brood first.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'd probably show The Brood first, just because of Bishop's Countdown, that song cue in the second film.
I think that's probably the way to go about it. Because I think, although The Brood now definitely has more of a following, but I think Aliens is still the bigger film. And a lot of people might not want to end their night with the image of Nola and her broodlings. So I picked two different options, and one I've already chatted about, but they follow along the same theme. I was thinking of Evil Children, one being more obvious. So I picked The Bad Seed because I love that movie, and
Good movie.
I think you would start with The Bad Seed
Hmm.
and with The Brood, and then I thought of another child who's super evil, but in a way that is obviously more bratty and instead of violently evil, but she's like an emotional terrorist. And this is Vita from Mildred Pierce. And for anyone who
Uh,
hasn't seen that Mildred Pierce's daughter in that is one of the worst children you'll ever watch on
yeah.
a film because she's just so incredibly mean. And I think it'd be interesting to watch the two in this because not Candy's not mean. The
No.
Broodlings are mean because they have an emotional tie to their mom who is angry and mean in those moments. So it'd be weird, funny to see, the literal of the way they're portrayed in that. But anytime I watch Mildred Pierce, I'm like, wow, Vita is a monster. And then we have actual little monsters in the Brood. So those are the two that I thought of for this. Very different if you're gonna go the Mildred Pierce route.
Yeah, I want to try that one.
Yeah,
No, that sounds enticing. I definitely would want to watch Mildred Pierce and
yeah,
Bruce back to back,
combo. Yeah,
double bill.
exactly.
Thankfully, in creating this art, he found relief himself. He did marry someone else and had a very wonderful marriage up until her passing,
Hmm.
which his next film is closely tied to her.
Hmm.
So we should be seeing maybe some more serious notes.
Yeah.
And ultimately, at least for David Cronenberg, one of the reasons why he hasn't made movies lately is because when I watched an interview with him, someone said, "How come you had not made a lot of movies?" And he says, "I'm enjoying being grandpa way too much."
Hmm. That's so sweet.
So he's got his happiness,
Yeah. Oh my
which I think
gosh.
is,
Imagine your grandfather being David Cronenberg. Like, I'm actually jealous of those children. That'd be so cool. Especially as they grow older and they tell their friends. Oh
I'd
my
be,
God.
yeah, no, it would be very, very, very cool. I would tell anyone who cared to know.
Yeah. I would
Uh,
introduce myself, but I'd be like, my grandfather is David Cronenberg.
yeah, hi, I'm David Cronenberg's grandson.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. I hope that they are proud of their grandfather. That was The Brood. I'm glad that we talked about it because The Brood is actually my favorite Cronenberg film.
Yeah.
So it's a huge filmography to pick from. And I'm always happy to talk about The Brood, and I'm happy to talk to you about The Brood. Thank you so much.
Thank you again for having me. It's been an honor, flattered that you asked me to join for your favorite David Cronenberg film, even though I picked it. So,
And when you picked it, I was like, thank God, you know, because I will talk about it any day of the week. I was happy to. Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia with intro music by Lamar Walker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesinmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesinmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcast. And stay tuned for our next episode on Crimes of the Future.
She's an evil chick. Say she's the way.